Hi, everyone. Um, Welcome to the video for this week's lesson. As I'm sure all of you know, this has been a really tough week in America. Um, we heard the story of George Floyd being murdered by the police, just one of the latest examples of our fundamentally racist systems and institutions and policing in the United States. And I'm super upset about it. I'm sad about it. I'm angry about it and confused about how it's still happening. I imagine a lot of you are dealing with a lot of feelings just like that. Um, this is a really hard thing to process. Um, and I hope that you are able to take care of yourselves, that you're able to talk to people about it, that you're able to um, turn away from the news if it's upsetting, or find more to read if you want to understand more about what's going on. And my hope is that this lesson, which will be oriented around giving you a chance to say how you're feeling, and for um, me to listen, and for others in our classes to listen to how you're feeling. Um, for those of you who want it, I hope it's a chance to process some of what's going on. Because if you have a lot of feelings right now, that makes a whole lot of sense. Um, so this week, sort of two goals to talk about how you are feeling about the murder of George Floyd and the protests that are going on around the country as a result. Um, this is really, there are no right or wrong answers in this week's lesson. There is no quiz at the end like there usually is. Whatever you're bringing to class today and this week, that's what we want to hear. And as a history teacher, I like to turn to history as a tool to understand some of what's going on. History can't give us all of the answers, but sometimes it can be a starting point. And so we'll be talking about a bit of the history of protests as a tool for change in the United States. I recognize that some of you might not want to talk about this. It's heavy, it's painful, it maybe you're talking about it a lot in other places already. And so I don't absolutely want to force anyone to participate in a conversation that's making them uncomfortable. So we have choices this week, as always. The main activity is about these protests, about Black Lives Matter, about police brutality, and it's structured generally the way most of our lessons are. But the second activity, which you can do to earn full credit, is to continue our study of rights in the United States and learn about the right to housing. And there's instructions for that on the assignment. Some quick reminders. School is rapidly ending. We have less than a month. So just another last plug to catch up on any work that you're missing, to make sure that you can earn the highest grade possible, look good on that college transcript, make sure you're not going to summer school, all of that. And I released a video on Monday that announced that I'm leaving Charlestown at the end of this year. It's really sad. I won't talk more about it here, but feel free to check out the video that's posted on the class stream, or I'll attach it to this assignment as well. But yeah, so without further ado, let's get on to this week's notes. This is step 3 of your assignment, and it's entitled Protests in America. The first note says that throughout American history, protests have been tools for blank people to fight back. Throughout American history, protests have been tools for oppressed people to fight back, people who are not treated right, people who don't have power and who are controlled by people, other people who do have the power. This is who we're talking about when we're talking about oppressed groups. And protest has been a common response. So let's go from right to left here. This is a picture of folks marching in the civil rights era, demanding for equality in their schools, equality before the law, the right to vote. all sorts of things. So the story of African Americans in the United States is one very much about protest. This one in the bottom, it's an appropriate picture for the beginning of June, which is Pride Month. This is a picture of the Stonewall riots, which happened in 1969, and it is considered the beginning of the gay rights movement in the United States. And those riots, that protest, was actually also a response to police brutality, much the way Black Lives Matter is today. The police were beating down on people who went to gay gatherings, and they finally started fighting back. And that spurred 50 years of protest and fighting and working for change for LGBT Americans. On the left side here, we have a picture of Cesar Chavez, and he's standing with the United Farm Workers. This is a group of predominantly Mexican-American workers in the Central Valley in California who were being mistreated by the bosses on the farms where they worked. And they got together and said, we're not working anymore until we're treated better. And it was met with a violent response, but it ended up working, and it ended up producing better working conditions for the folks working in those jobs. Even the freaking Boston Tea Party, which, you know, we celebrate so openly here in the United States and especially in Boston, that was a protest, and a violent protest. They literally destroyed ships worth of tea because they were mad at the British King. So from the very beginning of this country, protest has been a core part of its identity. Protests have multiple goals, including letting people express their blank, bringing blank to an issue, and pressuring blank to make change. So first, protests are a really human response. They let people express their anger. We see this time and time again, that when bad things happen, people come together to acknowledge that this is a really bad thing and to share in the emotional experience of something bad happening to them or to people like them. So the anger part of protest is real. It is one of the core aspects of it. It is done to bring attention to an issue, to make people understand that they need to care about this, that this issue is important. And part of bringing attention is to disrupt day-to-day life. Protests that don't inconvenience anyone don't get a lot of attention, but protests that are so big that they force people who didn't care to notice them, they interrupt their day-to-day life, those are the protests that actually get attention and that actually lead to change. So disruption, inconvenience, this is a core aspect of protest. And finally, protests are intended to pressure politicians to make change. Politicians, their power comes from voters, comes from people, and protests are a signal to those people in charge that this is what the people want, and you better pay attention. So these are sort of some of the mechanisms why protests matter, why people get involved in them. But on the other hand, despite the bravery of blanks over the years, America remains a deeply unjust place. Despite the bravery of activists, that's the name for people who are involved in protests, who push for social change. Despite the bravery of activists, it's obvious that America is still a very racist place. It's a sexist place. There's still homophobia and transphobia. It privileges the rich over the lower income folks. It is a country that is full of inequality, full of injustice, and I think it's legitimate also to question protest is good and protest can change, and yet we still have all of these issues. So what else, or is protest enough? So I want you to be thinking about this history, this context, as you're reading the next article and as you're answering the final reflection questions. What makes protests effective tools for making change? And given all of the emotion, the sadness, the anger, the fear surrounding the death of George Floyd, murdered by the police, how should people respond? Is protest the best way to respond? Are there other ways that you can think of that people can use these feelings, channel these feelings, try to make change in the world? So I'm really looking forward to what you have to say, and I will make sure to respond to it in writing or in person if we're on our calls together. As always, I'm online every single day. Join our Zoom classes, shoot me an email, leave me a comment in Google Classroom, text me, I'm here. All right, thanks everyone. Have a good week. Stay strong. I love you all.